The white corridors of the Galactic Research Center gleamed under artificial lights as Dr. Mark Thompson walked beside his alien escort. His footsteps echoed against the polished floor, creating a rhythm that seemed too loud in the quiet hallway. He tried to act normal, but it wasn't every day that a human became the first official specimen for alien research. The escort, a tall being with blue translucent skin that glowed softly in patterns, stopped at a large circular door. "Please wait here, Dr. Thompson. The research team will join you shortly." The words came through his universal translator with a slight delay. Mark nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. When he'd volunteered for this position at the GRC, he'd expected to work as a researcher, not become the subject of study. The message he'd received that morning had been clear. Humans were too biologically unusual to merely be observers. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a laboratory that looked more like a medical bay from a science fiction movie. Floating lights illuminated the room, and strange machines lined the walls. 5 alien beings stood around a central platform, their appearances as varied as Earth's animals. The tallest of them, another blue-skinned being like his escort, but with more complex light patterns, stepped forward. "Dr. Thompson, welcome. I am Dr. Blue, lead researcher of xenobiology at the GRC." The alien's skin pulsed with gentle waves of light as it spoke. "We appreciate your cooperation in this study." Mark smiled, remembering to keep his lips closed to avoid showing teeth, something he'd learned could be threatening to some species. "Happy to help advance our understanding of each other, Dr. Blue." "Excellent." Dr. Blue gestured to the platform. "Please stand here. We'll begin with basic scans." As Mark stepped onto the platform, beams of colored light passed over his body. The other aliens moved to different screens, their appendages moving quickly over holographic displays. Suddenly, one of the aliens, a short, fuzzy creature with 4 arms, made a sound like a squeaky door. "Dr. Blue, these readings, they can't be right." Dr. Blue moved to examine the screen, its light patterns shifting to a deeper blue. "Run the scan again." The beams passed over Mark a second time. He stood still, fighting the urge to scratch his nose. "The readings are the same," the fuzzy alien announced. "According to this, the human has multiple structural anomalies that should be fatal." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Fatal? I feel fine." Dr. Blue's pattern swirled with what Mark guessed was concern. "Your skeleton. It's filled with living tissue that produces blood cells. That should be impossible. The energy requirements alone." "Oh, you mean bone marrow." Mark couldn't help but laugh. "That's normal for humans." Another alien, this one looking like a tall praying mantis, stepped forward. "Normal? And what about these repair capabilities? Your cells show signs of constant damage and regeneration." "That's just regular cell replacement," Mark explained. "All humans do that." The room erupted in chittering and light patterns as the aliens discussed among themselves. Dr. Blue raised several appendages for silence. "Dr. Thompson," the alien said carefully, "your species constantly repairs itself without conscious control. And you all have blood-producing bones." "Yes. Is that unusual?" "Unusual." The fuzzy alien's fur stood on end. "It's unprecedented. The energy cost alone should make it impossible. And look at these readings. The human skin is constantly shedding and replacing itself. Their digestive system hosts billions of microscopic organisms that aid in food processing. They even have specialized organs just for filtering toxins." Dr. Blue's patterns shifted to what Mark was beginning to recognize as excitement. "Dr. Thompson, I believe we need to expand the scope of our study. Your species, humans, are far more unique than we initially suspected." Mark looked around at the amazed faces of the alien scientists. "But we haven't even done anything interesting yet. This is just basic human biology." "Basic?" Dr. Blue's lights pulsed rapidly. "If this is basic, I cannot imagine what you consider extraordinary. We need to document everything. The council must be informed." As the alien scientists bustled around him with more scanning devices, Mark realized that his new job was going to be very different from what he'd expected. He wasn't just going to study alien life. He was going to help them understand why humans, with all their impossible biological functions, were one of the strangest species in the galaxy. And they hadn't even gotten to the really weird stuff yet. 3 days had passed since Mark's initial examination, and the alien research team still hadn't gotten over their shock about basic human biology. Now they wanted to test his physical capabilities. "You want me to do what?" Mark asked, looking at the running track that circled the lab's testing chamber. Dr. Blue's skin flickered with light patterns. "We want to observe your species' reported endurance capabilities. Our records show humans can run for extended periods." Mark looked down at the running clothes he'd been given. "How long do you want me to run?" "Until you need to stop," the fuzzy alien researcher, now known as Dr. Fluff, said while adjusting some monitors. "We want to understand your limits." Mark shrugged and started his warm-up stretches. The alien scientists watched with fascination as he bent and flexed his joints. "Are you damaging your bone structure?" The mantis-like alien, Dr. Green, asked with concern. "No, this is just stretching. All humans do it before exercise." Mark finished his warm-up. "Ready when you are." The aliens took their positions behind various monitoring devices. Dr. Blue gave the signal to begin. Mark started running at an easy pace. He'd been a casual jogger on Earth, usually doing 5 miles every other day. The track's surface felt smooth under his feet, and the air temperature was comfortable. After 20 minutes, Dr. Fluff's fur started bristling. "The human's temperature is rising, but he's releasing water from his skin surface." "That's called sweating," Mark explained as he ran past. "It helps us cool down." "You cool yourselves by wasting water." Dr. Green's antennae twitched. Fascinating and disturbing. An hour passed. Then 2. Mark kept running, his shirt now soaked with sweat. He'd fallen into a steady rhythm, his breathing controlled and even. The alien scientists were no longer at their monitoring stations. They had gathered near the track, watching him with what looked like a mixture of horror and amazement. "How is this possible?" Dr. Blue's lights pulsed rapidly. "He's been in constant motion for 2 hours. The energy consumption should have depleted his reserves long ago." "I can keep going," Mark said, not even particularly tired yet. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters. We used to chase prey until they collapsed from exhaustion." The revelation caused such a stir that Dr. Fluff's fur puffed out to twice its normal size. "You hunted by exhausting other species to death." "Pretty much," Mark replied, still running. "We're not the fastest, but we can go for hours. Some humans can run for days with short rest breaks." "Days." Dr. Green's whole body swayed in shock. "But the heat buildup alone should." "That's what the sweating is for," Mark explained. "We just keep cooling ourselves and going. Want to see something really interesting?" Without waiting for an answer, Mark increased his pace to a sprint. The monitoring devices started beeping frantically. "His muscles are consuming energy at an incredible rate," Dr. Fluff announced. "And creating micro-tears. He's damaging himself." "Don't worry," Mark called out, still sprinting. "The tears will heal stronger than before. That's how humans build muscle." Dr. Blue's lights had turned almost white. "You deliberately damage your muscle tissue to make it stronger." "Exactly." Mark finally slowed back to a jog, then stopped. 3 hours had passed. He was sweaty and a bit tired, but otherwise fine. "Given a day or 2 of rest, the muscle damage will heal, and I'll be able to run even longer." The research team huddled together, their voices low and urgent. Mark grabbed a towel and started drying himself off. He could catch bits of their conversation. Regenerative capabilities, voluntary damage for enhancement, constant motion without collapse, efficient cooling system. Finally, Dr. Blue approached him. "Dr. Thompson, we need to discuss something called marathon running. Our records show humans do this for recreation. Mark grinned. Oh yeah. The current record for running 26.2 miles is just over 2 hours. The entire research team went silent. Dr. Fluff's fur deflated completely. Dr. Green's antennae drooped. And this is normal for humans? Dr. Blue asked carefully. Well, not everyone runs marathons, Mark said. But most humans could train for one if they wanted to. Some people run even longer distances for fun. Dr. Blue's lights dimmed to a soft glow. I believe we need to update our classification of human physical capabilities. You are not just biological anomalies. You are biological terrors. Mark laughed and reached for his water bottle. Just wait until I tell you about ultramarathons. The next phase of testing took place in what looked like a giant glass box. Mark stood inside while the alien research team adjusted the chamber's temperature controls. Are you sure about this, Dr. Thompson? Dr. Blue's lights pulsed with concern. These temperature ranges seem extremely dangerous. Mark nodded, wearing only shorts and a light t-shirt. Trust me, humans deal with these temperatures all the time. Let's start with heat. The chamber began to warm up. The monitoring screens showed the temperature climbing steadily. At 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, Dr. Fluff started making distressed squeaking sounds. The human should be showing signs of severe distress, the fuzzy alien said, checking the readings again. But his core temperature is staying stable. Mark wiped some sweat from his forehead. This is just a warm summer day back home. Many humans live in places much hotter than this. They pushed the temperature higher. At 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, Dr. Green's antennae were twitching frantically. He's still functioning and still conscious. Want to see something really interesting? Mark asked. He pulled a small metal container from his pocket, a thermos he'd brought from his quarters. This is what we call hot coffee. The aliens watched in horror as Mark unscrewed the cap and steam rose from the container. He took a long sip of the nearly boiling liquid. Stop. Dr. Blue's entire body flashed bright patterns. You're drinking heated liquid at a temperature that would cause internal damage to most species. Mark shrugged. Humans drink hot beverages all the time. Wait until you hear about spicy food. Spicy food. Dr. Fluff's fur bristled with curiosity. Yeah, we eat plants that cause a burning sensation. Some humans really enjoy it. The hotter the better. The research team needed several minutes to process this information. Finally, Dr. Blue spoke. Let's try cold temperatures now. The chamber began cooling rapidly. Mark put his coffee down and watched as his breath became visible in the air. At 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, he was still completely comfortable. At 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, he only looked mildly inconvenienced. Notice how his extremities are changing color, Dr. Green observed. But he's still maintaining function. This is nothing, Mark said, though he was starting to shiver slightly. Humans go skiing and ice fishing in temperatures way colder than this. Some people swim in frozen lakes for fun. For fun. Dr. Fluff's fur had completely flattened against their body. You deliberately immerse yourselves in freezing water for entertainment. Sure, it's called polar plunging. Pretty refreshing, actually. Dr. Blue's lights had taken on a deep purple hue. Dr. Thompson, are you saying humans voluntarily expose themselves to extreme temperatures for pleasure? Well, not all humans enjoy it, Mark admitted, but we can survive in temperatures from about minus 50 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius, minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit to 122 degrees Fahrenheit with basic protection. Some humans have survived even more extreme temperatures for short periods. The research team huddled together, their voices low but excited. Mark could see them adding more notes to their already extensive file on human biological capabilities. Dr. Blue approached the chamber's communication panel. This matches with historical data about human settlements. Your species has populated regions from frozen tundras to scorching deserts. Don't forget underwater habitats and space stations, Mark added. Humans are pretty adaptable. But how? Dr. Green asked. How can one species survive such temperature extremes? Mark thought for a moment. Well, we have lots of ways to regulate our body temperature. Sweating, shivering, changing our blood flow. Plus, we're really good at making tools and clothing to help us adapt. Dr. Blue's light patterns swirled in what Mark now recognized as amazement. Your species doesn't just survive these conditions. You actively seek them out and thrive in them. Speaking of thriving, Mark said, reaching for his coffee again, which was still steaming. Anyone want to try some hot chocolate later? It's another hot drink humans love. The entire research team took an involuntary step back from the chamber, their various appendages raised in polite refusal. I believe, Dr. Blue said carefully, we should add temperature immunity to the growing list of human biological terrors. And perhaps we should study your relationship with these spicy foods next. Mark grinned. Wait until you hear about ice cream headaches. Mark sat at a table in the research center's testing area. A collection of common human foods and drinks spread before him. Dr. Blue and the research team stood behind a safety barrier, their monitoring devices ready. Please confirm. Dr. Blue's lights flickered anxiously. You regularly consume these substances for pleasure. Mark looked at the items. Coffee, chocolate, tea, and a bottle of wine. These are pretty normal on Earth. Most humans have at least one of these every day. Dr. Fluff's scanning device beeped rapidly. The dark brown substance, chocolate, contains theobromine. That's toxic to most carbon-based life forms. Watch this, Mark said, unwrapping a chocolate bar. The alien's various appendages twitched as he took a big bite. Delicious. Humans love chocolate. We even give it to each other as gifts. You gift poison to your fellow humans. Dr. Green's antennae curled in shock. Mark reached for the coffee next. This one's really interesting. It contains caffeine, which is technically a pesticide that plants produce to kill insects. He took a long sip. Millions of humans can't even start their day without it. The research team's notes became even more frantic. Dr. Blue's lights had taken on a pale, worried color. You're saying humans intentionally drink insecticide every morning. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds bad, Mark laughed. But our bodies process it easily. The liver takes care of most toxins. Dr. Fluff brought up a holographic display of a human liver. Yes, your filtration organ, but the amount of toxins it processes should overwhelm it. Actually, Mark said, opening the wine bottle, the liver can handle quite a bit. This is alcohol. Humans have been drinking it for thousands of years. It's technically poison too, but we've evolved to process it. The aliens watched in fascination as he poured a glass. Dr. Green's instruments were going crazy. The ethanol content would disrupt cellular functions in most species. Some humans are more sensitive to it than others, Mark explained, taking the sip. But most can enjoy it in moderation. We even age it for years to improve the taste. You age your poisons. Dr. Blue's lights pulsed rapidly, to make them taste better. That's not even the strangest part, Mark said, reaching for the tea. Some humans deliberately eat toxic plants like pufferfish. If it's not prepared correctly, it can be deadly. But that makes it exciting for some people. The research team needed a moment to process this information. They huddled together, their voices a mix of chittering and humming sounds. Finally, Dr. Blue approached the barrier. Dr. Thompson, we've been analyzing Earth's ecosystem. Your planet contains an unusually high number of toxic substances. That makes sense, Mark nodded. Humans evolved alongside all these toxins. We had to adapt. But you didn't just adapt, Dr. Fluff interjected, fur bristling with excitement. You turned these poisons into beverages and snacks. And medicines, Mark added. Many human medicines are technically poisons in the right dose. We call it pharmacology. Dr. Green's antennae twitched. You use poison to heal. Exactly. Mark finished his coffee. The dose makes the poison, as humans say. Our bodies are pretty good at handling small amounts of toxic substances. Some can even be beneficial in the right quantities. Dr. Blue's lights had shifted to a deep, thoughtful blue. This explains much about human biology. Your species evolved on what we would consider a death world, surrounded by toxic substances. You didn't just survive. You learned to use these toxins for your benefit. And for fun, Mark added, breaking off another piece of chocolate. Don't forget that part. The research team watched as he happily ate more of the toxic chocolate. Dr. Fluff's instruments continued beeping, showing Mark's body efficiently processing multiple substances that would be lethal to other species. We need to update our classification again, Dr. Blue announced. Humans aren't just temperature-resistant and endurance predators. They're also poison eaters, Dr. Green finished, antennae quivering. Voluntary poison eaters who enjoy their toxins aged and sweetened. Mark grinned. Want to hear about hot sauce collections? Some humans compete to eat the spiciest peppers possible. Dr. Blue's lights dimmed to a worried flicker. Perhaps another day. I believe we need to process this information first. Fair enough, Mark said, sipping his wine. But wait until you learn about human pain tolerance. That's really going to blow your minds. The sleep study chamber looked like a comfortable bedroom, except for all the monitoring equipment and the transparent wall through which the alien research team watched Mark prepare for bed. Let me understand this correctly. Dr. Blue's lights pulsed slowly. You will now enter a state of temporary death for approximately 8 hours. Mark laughed as he sat on the bed. Sleep isn't death, Dr. Blue. It's just rest. All humans do it daily. But your consciousness, it stops. Dr. Fluff's fur rippled with concern. Not exactly. We dream during sleep. Mark lay down and pulled up the covers. Our brains are still active, just in a different way. The aliens exchanged worried looks. Dr. Green's antennae twitched rapidly. Dreams? You experience hallucinations while unconscious. Pretty much. Mark yawned. Sometimes we can even control them. It's called lucid dreaming. The monitoring equipment began recording as Mark's body relaxed. Dr. Blue watched the readings with fascination. His brain waves are changing patterns, heart rate decreasing. Yet he's still alive. Of course I'm still alive, Mark mumbled, already feeling sleepy. Wake me if you need anything. The research team observed in silence as Mark drifted off to sleep. After about an hour, Dr. Fluff's instruments detected something interesting. Look, the fuzzy alien chirped. His eyes are moving rapidly under the lids. Brain activity is increasing, but he remains unconscious. REM sleep, Mark's voice startled them. He had woken briefly, hearing their discussion. That's when we do most of our dreaming. It's normal. He rolled over and went back to sleep. Dr. Blue's lights flickered in amazement. He can wake and return to sleep at will, and remembers speaking to us. Hours passed as they studied this strange human behavior. Sometimes Mark would move or make small noises, but mostly he remained still. The aliens documented everything. Suddenly, an alarm blared in the facility. Mark sat up instantly, fully awake. Fascinating, Dr. Green exclaimed. Immediate transition from unconscious to alert status. That's adrenaline, Mark explained, heart racing from the unexpected noise. Humans can wake up quickly if we need to. Dr. Blue apologized for the alarm, just a routine system test, but was intrigued by this new information. You can override your sleep cycle in emergencies. Sure, Mark stretched. Humans can stay awake for days if necessary, though it's not healthy. We can also change our sleep patterns if needed. Dr. Fluff's fur stood on end. Change your patterns. You can control when you enter this death-like state. It's not death-like, Mark corrected. But yes, some humans work night shifts, sleeping during the day instead. Others take short naps throughout the day. We're pretty flexible. The research team huddled together, discussing this new information. Dr. Blue turned back to Mark. Our species requires specific rest cycles that cannot be altered. The idea of voluntary unconsciousness is disturbing. Want to hear something really interesting? Mark grinned. Some humans can fall asleep standing up. Soldiers learn to sleep whenever they can, even for just a few minutes. Dr. Green's entire body swayed in shock. You can control the duration too. More or less, Mark shrugged. Ever heard of power naps? 20 minutes of sleep can help humans feel refreshed. Dr. Blue's lights had taken on a pale, thoughtful color. So humans can enter unconsciousness at will, experience vivid hallucinations while unconscious, wake instantly if needed, alter their sleep cycles completely, and even sleep while standing. Don't forget dreams, Mark added. Sometimes we solve problems in our sleep. The human brain keeps working on challenges even when we're not conscious. The aliens were silent for a moment, processing this information. Finally, Dr. Fluff spoke up. This explains the human phrase, "I'll sleep on it," in our language database. Exactly. Mark laughed. Sometimes sleeping helps us make better decisions. Dr. Blue's lights pulsed rapidly. We need to update our classification again. Humans don't just have controlled temporary death periods. They have mastered unconsciousness itself. I wouldn't say mastered, Mark yawned again. But we're pretty good at it. Want to hear about lucid dreaming experiments? Some humans can control their dreams completely. Perhaps another time. Dr. Blue's lights dimmed slightly. I believe we've seen enough voluntary unconsciousness for one day. Mark smiled as he got up from the bed. Just wait until you learn about how humans can stay awake for days with enough caffeine. You know, that poison we drink every morning. The entire research team shuddered simultaneously. The medical bay's screens displayed various human pain responses as Mark sat through yet another round of tests. The alien research team had moved from basic biology to something they found even more disturbing: human willpower. You broke your leg 2 years ago. Dr. Blue's lights pulsed with disbelief. And you walked for half a mile on it. Had to get help. Mark shrugged. The hiking trail was pretty remote. No choice, really. Dr. Fluff's fur bristled as they reviewed the old medical scans. But the pain readings would have been extreme. Most species would have shut down immediately. Oh, it hurt like crazy, Mark admitted. But humans can override pain when we need to. Adrenaline helps. Dr. Green's antennae twitched rapidly as they brought up more medical data. We found numerous cases of humans ignoring severe injuries to help others. A mother lifted a vehicle to save her child. That's called hysterical strength, Mark explained. Humans can be surprisingly strong when someone they care about is in danger. Dr. Blue's lights flickered thoughtfully. You override your body's warning systems through sheer willpower. Pretty much. Mark pointed to the screens showing pain response charts. Pain is just information. Humans can choose to ignore it if something more important needs to be done. The research team exchanged worried looks. Dr. Fluff pulled up more data. What about these ultra-athletes we discovered? Humans who continue physical activity despite extreme exhaustion. Like ultramarathons, Mark nodded. Some humans run hundreds of miles with minimal rest. The body says stop, but the mind keeps going. Dr. Green's entire body swayed in amazement. And these humans who voluntarily expose themselves to extreme conditions. Ice baths, hot coals, high-altitude climbing without oxygen. Training and mental discipline, Mark explained. Humans can learn to control their body's responses. Some monks can even regulate their body temperature through meditation. Dr. Blue's lights had taken on a deep, concerned purple. You're saying humans can consciously control automatic biological responses? To some extent, Mark said. We can hold our breath until we pass out, though the body takes over then. We can stay awake for days, ignore hunger, push through exhaustion. It's not healthy, but we can do it. The research team huddled together, their voices a mix of fascination and concern. Dr. Blue turned back to Mark. We've observed that humans often continue functioning despite severe illness or injury. Why? Mark thought for a moment. We're stubborn, I guess. Humans have a hard time accepting limitations. We keep going because we believe we can. Belief overrides biology. Dr. Fluff's fur stood straight up. That's terrifying. Dr. Green suggested, antennae curled tightly. Impressive. Dr. Blue corrected, lights pulsing steadily. This explains much about human advancement. Your species doesn't accept biological limitations as absolute. Mark nodded. We see them more as challenges. If something seems impossible, some human somewhere will try to prove it's possible. Like these free divers we found records of. Dr. Fluff brought up new data. Humans who go to dangerous depths without breathing equipment. Exactly, Mark smiled. The body says it's impossible, but humans train their minds to overcome those limits. Dr. Blue's lights swirled with new understanding. This is why humans advanced so quickly in space exploration. You simply decided that you could survive in space. More or less, Mark laughed. We figured out what we needed to survive and made it happen. The human body isn't really suited for space, but our minds can adapt to almost anything. The research team began updating their files again. Dr. Blue approached Mark. We need to revise our classification once more. Humans aren't just physically resilient. Their cognitive abilities allow them to override biological imperatives at will. It's not always at will, Mark corrected. Sometimes it's just stubbornness. Or spite. Spite. Dr. Green's antennae straightened in confusion. Sure, Mark grinned. Sometimes humans do impossible things just because someone said they couldn't. Dr. Blue's lights flickered rapidly. You achieve biological overrides. Out of defiance. Wait until you hear about the first human marathon runner, Mark said. He ran so far to deliver a message that he died at the end. And now humans run that distance for fun, just to prove they can. The entire research team went silent, their various appendages drooping in shock. Perhaps, Dr. Blue said finally, we should study human psychology next. Though I suspect we may find that even more disturbing than your biology. Mark just smiled. Probably. After all, the mind is what makes all the other stuff possible. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Research Center was packed with representatives from 50 different species. Dr. Blue stood at the center platform, light patterns shifting nervously as the final report on human biology was presented. Mark sat in a special observation area, the only human in the room. Distinguished council members, Dr. Blue began, lights pulsing steadily. Our 3-month study of human biology has led us to a startling conclusion. Humans are not simply another spacefaring species. They are biological terrors that defy our understanding of life itself. A murmur ran through the assembled aliens. Dr. Blue brought up a holographic display showing Mark's test results. Consider the evidence. Humans can repair severe bone damage and regenerate vital organs. They constantly shed and regrow their outer layer. They maintain complex colonies of microorganisms inside their bodies. And this is just their basic functioning. Dr. Fluff stepped forward, fur neatly groomed for the occasion. Their endurance capabilities are extraordinary. Humans can continue physical activity long after other species would collapse. They hunt by exhausting their prey, literally running after them, until the prey gives up from fatigue. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Green joined their colleagues, antennae straight and professional. Their temperature adaptation is unprecedented, Dr. Green announced. Humans survive in conditions that would kill most species. They drink nearly boiling liquids for pleasure and deliberately eat plants that cause pain. Some even swim in frozen water for entertainment. More disturbed murmurs filled the chamber. Dr. Blue's lights shifted to a calm, authoritative blue. Most alarming is their relationship with toxins, they continued. Humans regularly consume substances that would be lethal to other species. They have transformed poisons into beverages and treats. Their bodies can process these toxins not just safely, but efficiently. A council member raised an appendage. Are they a threat to galactic society? Mark tensed in his seat, but Dr. Blue's answer was measured. On the contrary, humans are not aggressive unless threatened. Their biological adaptability makes them invaluable allies. They can work in environments too hostile for other species. They can test food for toxins. They can continue functioning in emergencies long after others would need rest. Dr. Fluff brought up new data. Their ability to override biological imperatives through sheer willpower is remarkable. They ignore pain, suppress sleep, and resist environmental extremes through mental discipline alone. And yet, Dr. Green added, they use these abilities not just for survival, but for achievement. They set arbitrary challenges for themselves, pushing their limits simply to prove they can. The council chamber buzzed with discussion. Finally, the head council member spoke. What is your recommendation, Dr. Blue? Dr. Blue's lights glowed with firm conviction. We recommend classifying humans as a protected species, not because they need protection, but because they are too valuable to risk losing. Their biology offers insights that could benefit all species, and frankly, Dr. Blue's lights flickered with amusement. We should stay on their good side. Mark couldn't help but smile as laughter rippled through the chamber, each species expressing humor in their own way. Very well, the head council member announced. We accept your recommendation. Humans shall be classified as a protected species, with full rights to continue their biological research and share their adaptability with the galactic community. As the council session ended, Dr. Blue approached Mark. I hope our report met with your approval. Mark grinned. It was perfect. Though you missed one important thing about humans. Dr. Blue's lights swirled with curiosity. Oh, after 3 months of study, what could we have missed? We're never satisfied with where we are, Mark said. Now that we know what other species think is impossible, we'll work even harder to prove we can do more. Dr. Blue's lights flickered with what Mark now recognized as laughter. Indeed, perhaps that is the strangest thing about human biology. It is powered by an unstoppable spirit of defiance against limitations. That's humanity for you, Mark shrugged. We're too stubborn to accept impossible as an answer. Then we look forward to many more impossible things from your species, Dr. Blue concluded. Just, perhaps warn us before you start drinking any new types of poison. Mark laughed. No promises. Some human somewhere is probably already trying to figure out how to drink lava, just to prove it can be done. After all, what's so strange about human biology? As it turns out, everything. The research team's various appendages all drooped simultaneously at this thought, but their expressions showed a new respect for their strange human friend and his impossibly adaptable species.